Hi, this is Dan, or God is my judge. I'm responding to Paul Manata's post, some cleanup on Triablog, and he brought up some various issues in our debate. We've been having a debate on choice and determinism, or actually choose and determinism. So long story short, I just wanted to address some of his miscellaneous issues that he brought up. The first issue that he brings up is the clarity or perspicuity of Scripture. And the way my argument runs is this. Choose rules out determinism. If you look at the definition of choose, it rules out determinism. And that's primarily where the debate has been. But in addition to that, I make the claim that the Bible uses the word choose, and therefore determinism has to go. Now, as you can tell, the argument itself doesn't rely on or depend upon the clarity of Scriptures. So the clarity of Scriptures is somewhat of a tangent, but I'll go ahead and address it. What's happened is Paul provided a counter definition for choose. I provided a normal definition out of the dictionary. He provided a counter definition from the philosopher Robert Kane. I said that definition is philosophical and can't be used to interpret Scriptures. Now, Paul himself has denied that the definition is philosophical, and I provided reasons and evidence from Kane that it is philosophical and that it is a very special definition. In addition to that, Paul's partner, Steve Hayes, also disagrees with the approach of using philosophy and philosophical definitions, or not philosophy, but philosophical definitions to interpret Scripture. So, long story short, both Paul and Steve have certainly paid lip service to not using philosophical definitions to define Scripture. So for that reason, really, the clarity of Scripture is a side issue and a tangent. So the only reason to get into the argument at all about the clarity of Scriptures is because of what Paul has said about it. He's drawn some conclusions based on what I've said. He said that I believe that all Calvinists are not saved, and also he said that I believe that all of the Israelites and everyone in the church is libertarian. And he's drawn those conclusions based on what I've said on the clarity of Scriptures. And it's really unclear as to how he got there, but that's his argument. I'll just go ahead and just deny both things. I don't believe either, and I don't believe either follows from the doctrine of clarity of Scripture. The clarity of Scriptures, once again, was brought up simply to rebuke the notion that you can bring in philosophical definitions to interpret Scripture. And that's something that fundamentally Paul, Steve, and I are probably on the same page on. So long story short. Now, the issue with the clarity of Scriptures itself, let's go ahead and just explain it. There's the difference between fundamentals of the faith and other aspects. So let's say that Jesus Christ is the Son of God is a fundamental of the faith, and that's taught clearly in Scriptures. On the flip side, let's say some of the aspects of Revelation or some of the genealogies in the Old Testament, for example, are not fundamental aspects of the faith. And the doctrine of the perspicuity of Scripture is essentially that the essentials of the faith are clear and they're something that we can understand. Now, what I'm saying is that the basis, the foundation for that doctrine, that principle, is that the mode of communicating Scripture, the way Scripture is communicated, is it's communicated in a way that the common man can read and understand it. Now, on the receiving side, perhaps there might be limitations in terms of what we can know in some areas. Certainly there's mysteries and things like that we don't know, but it doesn't mean that the mode has changed. But as a foundation to the issue that the essentials are clear, is that the Scriptures are being communicated to us clearly. And all I'm really denying is you shouldn't use philosophy to, not philosophy, but philosophical definitions to interpret Scripture. So if you see a scriptural word, don't just go off and make up a definition and that's what the word means. You've got to use context and normal means that normal people would use, especially during that time and in that context, to interpret those terms. And from that, hopefully it's clear that I don't believe that all Calvinists are going to hell, and I don't believe that every single person throughout history was a determinist, and how Paul got to that notion is beyond me. Next is the issue of a quote I brought up about Justin Martyr. Justin Martyr basically quoted a passage from Deuteronomy that says we choose, and he used that notion to combat Stoic fatalism. Now, I brought that quote up for two reasons. One, to show his approach, that he was using Scripture to combat philosophy, which was something that Paul seemed to be balking at. And the second reason I brought it up is to show that the definition of choose hasn't changed over time. Our definition today of choose is replete enough to rule out determinism because it involves alternative possibilities. Justin Martyr's must have been the same. His definition of choice must have been the same. And the reason why is his definition was strong enough to rebut Greek Stoic fatalism. Now, Paul's response is, so what? Justin Martyr isn't God. Well, I didn't say Justin Martyr was God. I already gave my reasons why I gave the quote, and they do address and actually refute the problems in your post. Next, Paul basically says that, well, Stoic fatalism doesn't have anything to do with Calvinism, and Stoic fatalism is different than accidental necessity. So the point about the Justin Martyr quote is irrelevant. Well, the issue isn't so much what Justin Martyr is arguing against, it's what he's arguing for. He's arguing for choice, and his argument for choice is based on Scripture, and it uses a definition of choice that apparently rules out Stoic fatalism. Stoic fatalism was based on what might be called logical determinism, and it's the idea that a truth can be said to be determinately true before it happens. So, long story short, one of the classic examples is Aristotle's sea battle example, where if someone says that a sea battle is going to happen, and if that statement is true, then that will happen, and it must happen. It necessarily happens. It can't not happen. And the idea that choice rules out that notion means that choice entails alternative possibilities. So the issue, once again, is not what Justin Martyr is attacking. It's what he's advocating. He's advocating a choice sufficient to knock down Stoic fatalism. So while I understand that it's not exactly Calvinism, in fact there's some big differences between it and Calvinism, long story short, it is sufficient to knock down the argument about determinate truth, and that's a specific argument that Steve Hayes has actually brought out in our recent debate. So that's all I had to say. God be with you.